It began with a scream that echoed across the world, a scream of defiance and pain. Hurin the Lion, the mightiest warrior of his people, stood tall on the battlefield, defying Morgoth, the Dark Lord of Angband. The war between Morgoth and the elves, along with their human allies, was fierce, and though the forces of good fought valiantly, they were no match for the relentless power of the Dark Lord. Hurin fought to the bitter end, but he was captured, not slain. Morgoth had other plans for him. Bound in chains, Hurin was dragged to Angband, the Black Fortress, where Morgoth waited in his throne room. There, in the shadows, the Dark Lord loomed over the broken warrior, but Hurin's spirit remained unbroken. Morgoth demanded to know the location of the hidden city of Gondolin, a stronghold of the elves, but Hurin refused to speak. His defiance only fueled Morgoth's wrath. As punishment, Morgoth laid a terrible curse upon Hurin and his entire family, condemning them to a fate of sorrow and despair. Hurin was forced to watch, bound to a high place, as his children's lives were twisted by the malice of Morgoth's curse. Far away in the land of Dorlaman, Hurin's wife, Morwen, remained with their children. She was a woman of strength, but the curse began to weigh on her like a storm cloud that would never lift. When news came of Hurin's capture, she feared for her son, Túrin, knowing that danger lurked ever closer. As the darkness spread across the land, she made a painful decision. She would send her young son to the hidden elven kingdom of Doriath, where he could be safe under the protection of King Thingol and his queen, Melian. Túrin, just a boy, was taken from the only home he had ever known. Morwen could not go with him, as she was pregnant with their second child and unwilling to abandon her lands. So, she stood at the gates as Túrin was led away, hiding her tears. She told him to be strong, to remember who he was, and promised that one day they would be reunited. But Túrin's heart was already breaking. He didn't know then that this parting was just the beginning of his sorrow. In Doriath, the young boy grew up under the care of King Thingol and Queen Melian. Thingol welcomed him as a son, and Melian, with her deep wisdom, saw the shadow of fate that lingered over him, though she could not alter it. Despite the love and care he received, Túrin never truly felt at home. He missed his mother, and though the elves of Doriath were kind, their world was different, filled with songs and languages that often made him feel like an outsider. Still, he grew strong, tall, and fierce, admired by many for his courage and skill in battle, even at a young age. Yet, with each passing year, the curse laid by Morgoth started to unravel its cruel threads. Though Túrin was far from his homeland, the shadow of that curse followed him. Misfortune seemed to haunt him wherever he went. Tragedies befell those close to him, though never through his own fault. It was as if the curse itself was alive, twisting every good intention, every brave act, into something dark and sorrowful. As Túrin grew older, word reached him that Dorlaman had fallen into even deeper darkness. His mother, Morwen, was still there, refusing to leave, waiting for her son to return. But by then, Túrin had become a young man, hardened by his time in Doriath. His heart was filled with a longing to fight, to make things right, but deep down, he could feel the weight of the doom that hung over his life. He had been given so much, the protection of a mighty king, the love of a wise queen, but no matter where he turned, sorrow seemed to follow. And so, the shadow began to grow. Morgoth's curse, like a poison, spread from Hurin's capture to every corner of Túrin's life. Even in the beautiful, serene halls of Doriath, where the golden light of the two trees once touched the world, darkness began to seep into Túrin's heart. The elves, wise as they were, could sense it, but they could not stop it. King Thingol treated Túrin like a son, yet even his fatherly care could not lift the curse. Queen Melian, who saw the future more clearly than most, knew that Túrin was walking a path shadowed by doom, but she too was bound by the limits of fate. Túrin, however, was a child of Hurin, a child born of strength and pride. He refused to be a victim of fate, though he could not understand the forces that sought to destroy him. As he trained in swordsmanship and grew into a warrior, he believed that his skill and bravery could overcome any obstacle. He would be the master of his own destiny. He would defeat the darkness that chased him. But fate is not something that can be so easily defeated. Back in Dorlaman, Morwen lived under the constant threat of invaders and the ever-present curse. Her daughter, Ninor, was born into this world of fear and waiting. Morwen, though proud, felt the full weight of Morgoth's shadow pressing down on her, though she never gave up hope that Túrin would return. But time and distance weighed heavily on her, and as the years passed, the family became more isolated, their fates intertwined in a web of sorrow that even the strongest could not untangle. Túrin's childhood, though spent in the safety of Doriath, was always overshadowed by the unshakable feeling of something dark and terrible waiting for him. Every moment of joy was colored by a sense of dread, every victory was tainted by the fear of what was yet to come. It happened in a moment, a flash of rage that Túrin could never take back. Saros, one of the elves in Doriath, had long harbored ill will toward him, mocking his human heritage and belittling his strength. Day after day, those taunts grew sharper until one day, they cut too deep. In a fit of anger, Túrin lashed out, chasing Saros through the woods. He didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. Saros fell to his death, and the blood on Túrin's hands marked him forever. Túrin felt the weight of that mistake pressing down on him, heavier than any sword he had ever carried. It wasn't just Saros' death, it was the shame, the guilt, the feeling that no matter where he went, the curse of his family followed him like a shadow. He couldn't stay in Doriath after that. Though King Thingol offered him a chance to stay, to face a trial, Túrin couldn't bear it. He fled, running from both the crime and the fate that seemed determined to crush him. Out in the wilds, Túrin wandered alone. The forest, once full of life, now felt cold and empty. The whispers of the curse seemed to echo in every rustle of leaves. He was no longer the boy raised by elves, no longer the beloved ward of a king. Now, he was a fugitive, and with every step, the burden of his father's curse grew heavier. He took on a new name, Nethin, which meant the wronged. But in his heart, he knew that he was not just wronged, he was running from something far deeper, his own destiny. Alone and embittered, Túrin soon found himself among outlaws, men who had been cast out by society, just like him. They were wild, hardened by a life of violence and survival, but Túrin fit in easily. He was strong, fearless, and his anger made him ruthless. In time, he became their leader, guiding them through countless battles, raids, and skirmishes. His reputation as a warrior grew, and the outlaws looked to him not just for strength, but for wisdom. Yet beneath that fearless exterior, Túrin was still fighting the same battle, with himself, with the curse, and with the guilt that gnawed at him. Túrin's heart was torn between two worlds. On one hand, he wanted to believe that he could shape his own fate, that the curse was just a shadow he could outrun. On the other, he couldn't ignore the way misfortune seemed to follow him wherever he went. The men who followed him saw him as a hero, a figure of strength and resilience, but they didn't see the darkness that haunted his every step. He was their leader, yes, but he was also a man fighting against forces far beyond his control. The forest became their home, and the outlaws fought fiercely for survival. In battle, Túrin was unmatched, his skill with a sword was legendary. Yet with every victory, there was always a sense that it would never be enough. No matter how many battles he won, no matter how many enemies he defeated, he could never escape the feeling that fate was tightening its grip around him. He was not just fighting men, he was fighting his own destiny. One day, after a particularly brutal battle, Túrin stood on a hill, watching the smoke rise from the battlefield. His sword, bloodied and heavy, hung at his side. The men he led celebrated their victory, but Túrin felt no joy. He was tired, not just from the battle, but from the constant struggle against the curse that seemed to cling to him. It was in that moment that he made a decision. He would no longer be a victim of fate. He would be its master. He took on a new name, Turambar, which meant master of fate. In that name, Túrin found a sense of power, a belief that he could finally control his own destiny. He no longer wanted to be bound by the curse that Morgoth had laid upon his family. He would fight it, defy it, and carve out his own path. The name Turambar wasn't just a title, it was a declaration. Túrin was determined to rise above the shadows that had haunted him for so long. But even as he embraced this new identity, the curse still lingered in the corners of his mind. Every time he thought he had escaped it, something happened to remind him that fate was not so easily controlled. His leadership of the outlaws was marked by both glory and sorrow. While his men saw him as invincible, Túrin knew that the curse was always there, waiting for him to falter. He became harder, colder, as if by denying his own emotions, he could deny the curse itself. His decisions grew bolder, his actions more ruthless. Yet behind every victory was a shadow, a reminder that no matter how far he ran, no matter how many names he took, the curse was still there. Turambar was not just a name of power, it was a name of defiance, of a man trying to outrun a fate that had already been written. As Turambar, Túrin fought harder than ever before. His name spread far and wide, and with it came both admiration and fear. But the harder he fought, the more it seemed that fate was tightening its grip on him. He could change his name, change his path, but he could never fully escape the shadow that loomed over him. The curse of Morgoth was not something that could be defeated by swords or strength. It was woven into the very fabric of his being. Túrin, now Turambar, was no longer just a man running from his past. He was a man trying to rewrite his future, to take control of the destiny that had been forced upon him. Yet even as he called himself master of fate, he knew that the battle he was fighting was one that could never truly be won. Every victory was tainted with the knowledge that somewhere, somehow, fate was waiting to strike again. And so, Turambar fought on, a man caught between the desire to control his own destiny and the crushing weight of a curse that refused to let him go. Each step he took was filled with both hope and despair, as he tried to escape a fate that had been written long before he was born. Túrin arrived at Nargothrond as a stranger, but it didn't take long for him to make his presence felt. His reputation as a warrior had preceded him, and those in the Hidden Kingdom were curious about the man who bore such a heavy fate. Nargothrond, with its great halls and deep caverns, was a place of beauty, but it was also a place on the edge of war. Túrin saw this immediately, and his heart stirred with the desire to protect it, to lead its people to glory and victory. He was not content to stand by and watch as the forces of Morgoth crept closer. Túrin's pride, his belief that strength alone could change the tide of fate, drove him to take a more active role in the defense of Nargothrond. The elves of the city, led by Orodreth, welcomed his advice at first. They saw in him a warrior of unmatched skill, someone who could lead them in the face of danger. But as time passed, tension began to grow. Túrin's wisdom was clouded by his pride. He believed in open war, in meeting the enemy head-on, while the elves had long relied on secrecy and stealth to keep their city safe. The more Túrin pushed for battle, the more the people of Nargothrond followed him. His confidence was infectious, and many believed that with him at their head, they could defeat any foe. But there were voices of caution, voices Túrin refused to hear. The greatest of these warnings came from Olmo, the Lord of Waters, who sent a message through the elf Gwender, urging the destruction of the great bridge that spanned the river leading to Nargothrond. The bridge was the only path for enemies to reach the hidden city, and Olmo knew that if it remained standing, doom would follow. But Túrin, with his pride burning brightly, refused. He would not hide behind walls and rivers. He would not destroy the bridge. In his heart, he believed that if they were to fight, they should fight with open strength. He could not see the wisdom in retreat, only the promise of victory in battle. And so, the bridge remained, a path left open for the enemy that was coming. When the dragon Glorhung came, it was as if doom itself had finally arrived. The fire-breathing beast, a servant of Morgoth, led the forces of darkness to the very gates of Nargothrond. The battle was fierce, and Túrin fought with all the strength and bravery that had earned him his name. But Glorhung was no ordinary foe. The dragon's presence on the battlefield was overwhelming, and no amount of skill could turn the tide against him. As the flames of Glorhung consumed the city, the bridge that Túrin had refused to destroy became the very path through which the enemy poured into Nargothrond. The Hidden Kingdom, once a place of beauty and safety, was reduced to ruins. The people, whom Túrin had sworn to protect, were either killed or taken as slaves. And in the midst of the destruction, Glorhung found Túrin. The dragon's eyes, ancient and full of malice, met Túrin's, and in that moment, Túrin was frozen, not by fear, but by the dragon's spell. Glorung's voice echoed in his mind, filling him with lies and deceit. He spoke of Túrin's failures, of the lives lost because of his pride, of how he had doomed the very people he sought to save. Túrin, trapped in the dragon's gaze, could not fight back. His sword was useless against the weight of his own guilt. When the spell finally broke, Túrin stood in the ashes of Nargothrond. The city was gone, its people scattered or dead. Glorung had left, but the damage he had done remained. Túrin, the warrior who had once believed he could master his own fate, now carried the crushing weight of responsibility. He had refused to listen to wisdom, had believed that strength alone could save them, and in doing so, he had led Nargothrond to its doom. The guilt that followed him was like a shadow that he could never escape. He had wanted to protect, to lead, to be a hero, but all he saw now were the consequences of his choices. The people who had once looked to him with hope were gone, and the city they had built was nothing more than ruins. Túrin's pride had led him down this path, and now, standing among the wreckage, he realized that he could not fight fate. No matter how hard he tried to be strong, to be the master of his own destiny, the curse that Morgoth had laid upon his family had found him once again. But it wasn't just the curse. It was his own decisions, his own refusal to listen, that had brought him here. The fall of Nargothrond wasn't just a result of Morgoth's malice, it was the result of Túrin's pride. And that knowledge, more than anything, was what haunted him. Every step he took after that, every breath, was heavy with the weight of what he had lost, and what he had caused. The warrior who had once been so sure of himself, so determined to shape his own fate, now carried the burden of those he had failed. The curse of Morgoth was real, but so was the responsibility Túrin bore for his own choices. Nargothrond, the city that had once been a beacon of hope, was gone, and with it, a piece of Túrin's soul. The warrior who had fought so bravely now had to live with the knowledge that in his attempt to defy his fate, he had only brought it closer. Túrin was wandering, lost in both mind and heart, when Glorung's cruel spell bound him. The dragon's lies had stolen his memories, leaving him adrift, a man without a past. The curse that had followed him all his life now took its final, cruel twist. It wasn't enough for Morgoth to ruin his future. Glorung ensured that Túrin forgot everything he once knew about his family, his name, and the horrors that had come before. It was during this time that he met her, Ninjal, as she was called by the people of Brethil. She was gentle, kind, and lost in her own way. She had no memory of her past, just as Túrin had none of his. Neither of them knew that the same blood ran in their veins, that she was Ninor, his sister. Fate, in its most brutal and twisted form, had brought them together. In Brethil, Túrin became their protector. The people there, threatened by Glorung's forces and the shadow of Morgoth, looked to him for guidance and strength. And Túrin, ever the warrior, embraced this role. He fought with courage and skill, pushing back against the dark forces that sought to destroy them. But amidst the battles and the constant threat of war, there was something more. Túrin found comfort in Ninjal, and she in him. Their bond grew slowly, tenderly, like a fragile flame in the midst of a storm. Ninjal's presence soothed the turmoil in Túrin's heart, the pain of a forgotten past, the weight of a future he couldn't see. She admired his strength, his unwavering determination to protect the people of Brethil, and she saw in him a man who had suffered much, though he never spoke of it. And Túrin, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, felt something like peace. The two of them spent their days in quiet moments, walking through the woods, talking of dreams they could never remember, and plans for a future that seemed full of hope. For a time, it seemed as if Túrin had finally outrun the curse, finally found a life that was his own. The darkness that had haunted him for so long seemed distant, pushed away by the warmth of Ninjal's love. He felt whole, and with her by his side, the warrior became something more, a man, capable of love, capable of dreaming. But fate, always lurking, always watching, was not finished with Túrin yet. Glorung returned. The dragon, whose spell had stolen Túrin's memories, now sought to destroy what little happiness he had found. Túrin knew the only way to protect Brethil was to face Glorung once and for all. And so, he went to battle, the same fire burning in him as always, determined to kill the creature that had brought him so much pain. With fierce determination, he fought the dragon, and in a mighty stroke, Túrin drove his sword into Glorung's belly, wounding the beast fatally. But as Glorung lay dying, the dragon unleashed one final cruelty. With his last breath, Glorung lifted the veil of forgetfulness from Túrin's mind. In an instant, the memories rushed back, the curse, his family, the name he had once borne, and the truth he had been running from all along. And with it came the most devastating revelation of all. Ninjal was not just the woman he loved, she was Ninor, his sister. The world shattered around him. The love they had shared, the bond they had formed, it was built on a lie that Glorung had created with his spell. Túrin fell to his knees, not from the exhaustion of battle, but from the weight of this unbearable truth. He had unknowingly loved his own sister, had shared his life with her, and the realization tore him apart. The curse of Morgoth had finally revealed its darkest, most horrifying twist. Ninor, too, learned the truth. The name Ninjal no longer fit her, for she remembered who she truly was, Ninor, daughter of Hurin, sister of Túrin. The shock of this knowledge, the horror of what they had become, was too much for her to bear. Grief-stricken and overwhelmed, she fled from Túrin, her mind consumed by the tragic revelation. She could not live with the knowledge of what had happened, could not bear the weight of the curse that had ruined them both. Túrin called after her, his heart breaking, but Ninor was beyond saving. In her despair, she threw herself into the raging waters below, ending her life in the only way she knew how. The love that had once seemed like salvation was now a bitter, tragic memory. Túrin, left alone on the cliffs, watched as the last piece of his heart disappeared into the depths. The curse had claimed everything. His family, his friends, and now, the one person he had truly loved. There was nothing left but the cold realization that Morgoth's curse had been more powerful than he had ever imagined. It had not only destroyed his life, but it had twisted the very essence of who he was, turning his love into the darkest tragedy. In that moment, Túrin knew that there was no escaping fate. The weight of his choices, of his life, came crashing down on him, and there was no longer any path forward. The love he had shared with Ninor was now a cruel memory, a reminder that he had never truly been free from the curse that had haunted him from the moment of his birth. Túrin stood on the edge of despair, his heart heavy with the truth he could no longer deny. The weight of everything, his choices, his pride, and the cruel hand of fate, pressed down on him, suffocating any last hope he might have clung to. Ninor, the woman he had loved, was his sister. The curse of Morgoth had played its final, devastating card, and Túrin, the once proud warrior, was left with nothing but his unbearable grief. His mind reeled with memories, his mother, his father Hurin, bound by Morgoth's curse, the fall of Nargothrond, the death of Beleg, and now Ninor. Every step of his life had been shadowed by this curse, an invisible hand guiding him toward his inevitable doom. It wasn't just the curse, though. His pride, the belief that he could somehow overcome his fate, had played its part too. He had fought so hard to shape his destiny, to be free of the dark shadow that loomed over his family, but in the end, it had only led him here, alone, broken, and drowning in sorrow. The sword Gurthang, cold and sharp, rested in his hands. This sword, which had served him in so many battles, now felt like a final, silent companion. It had been the instrument of both justice and tragedy, cutting down his enemies and his closest friends alike. And now, it would bring his story to an end. Túrin looked at the blade, its dark steel reflecting the weight of his life. There was no escaping it, no escape from what he had become, no redemption from the choices he had made. His final confrontation wasn't with Morgoth or any enemy, it was with his own soul, twisted and shattered by the curse. He had lost everything, everyone he loved, and now he stood on the precipice of a fate he could no longer fight. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, Túrin's thoughts turned to his father, Hurin. The man who had been captured, who had watched, helplessly, as his son's life unraveled from afar. Túrin understood now, more than ever, the torment that had consumed his father. The curse had destroyed them both, torn their lives apart, and scattered the pieces like dust. The idea of living with the knowledge of what he had done, of who he had loved, was more than he could bear. Kneeling on the ground, his heart heavy with sorrow, Túrin raised Gerdhang. His hands trembled as he whispered to the blade, asking if it would take his life, as it had taken so many others. In a moment both chilling and powerful, the sword answered, a dark voice, full of ancient sorrow, agreed to end his life, just as it had ended others in the name of its master. With that final acknowledgement, Túrin laid himself down, and the blade pierced him, bringing an end to the long, tragic tale of Túrin Turambar. His life had been a constant struggle against fate, a relentless battle against forces far beyond his control. And in the end, his death was as much a fulfillment of that fate as it was an escape from it. He had fought so hard to master his own destiny, but in his final moments, it was clear that the curse had won. The symbolism of Túrin's death echoes through Middle-earth. His sword, Gerdhang, the same weapon that had delivered justice and caused tragedy, now served as the tool of his final release. Túrin's story is one of defiance, of a man trying desperately to shape his own fate in a world where destiny is inescapable. But his death, though tragic, is also a moment of quiet surrender. In taking his own life, Túrin acknowledges that he could never escape the curse, and in doing so, he brings an end to his suffering. Túrin Turambar, Master of Doom, became a figure of immense sorrow in the First Age of Middle-earth. His life, marked by tragedy, was a stark reminder of the power of fate and the cruelty of Morgoth's curse. But beyond the pain and the despair, Túrin's legacy endures. He was not a hero in the traditional sense. His story is not one of triumph over evil, but rather a reflection of the frailty of even the greatest warriors in the face of dark powers. In the grand mythos of Middle-earth, Túrin's tale is one of the most sorrowful. His death, like his life, was wrapped in the inescapable threads of fate. Yet, even in his darkest moments, Túrin's strength and courage could not be denied. He fought, not just against his enemies, but against the forces that sought to destroy his very soul. His story is one of the most human in Tolkien's legendarium, filled with mistakes, pride, love, and ultimately, heartbreaking tragedy. In his final act, Túrin sought to end the pain that had followed him since birth, and in doing so, he fulfilled the curse that had haunted him. But his legacy lived on. The memory of Túrin, the warrior who fought so hard to defy his fate, remained etched in the history of Middle-earth, a reminder that even in a world filled with magic and power, the weight of one's choices and the pull of destiny are inescapable forces. And so, with his sword in hand and his heart heavy with sorrow, Túrin Turambar passed into the shadows, leaving behind a story that would be told for generations, a tale of pride, love, and inevitable doom.